Think you know the whole story? Turns out you were probably taught the half-truth. Welcome to Half-Truths. Picture it. It's a hot July night in 1969. The world is holding its collective breath, eyes glued to fuzzy black and white television screens. A bulky, almost cartoonish figure in a spacesuit slowly, carefully descends a ladder. A ghostly voice crackles across 250,000 miles of empty space. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It's a memory so ingrained in our culture that even those of us born decades later feel like we were there. It's the pinnacle of human achievement, the moment we slipped the surly bonds of Earth and set foot on another world. It's a story of courage, ingenuity, and a nation's resolve. We saw it. We heard it. It happened. But what if it didn't? What if the most watched television event in history was just that, television? What if the lunar landscape was a soundstage in the Nevada desert? What if the astronauts were actors, the rockets were props, and the whole thing was an elaborate multi-billion-dollar lie cooked up by a government desperate to win the space race? This is the core of one of the most enduring and fascinating conspiracy theories of all time. The idea that the Apollo moon landings were faked. It's a story whispered in documentaries, debated in internet forums, and believed by a surprising number of people. The idea is that the United States, lagging behind the Soviets and fearing it couldn't meet President Kennedy's deadline, chose to simulate the landings rather than achieve them. On this episode of Half-Truths, we're venturing into the shadows of the Sea of Tranquility. We're not just asking if we went to the moon. We're asking why, for over 50 years, the story of a hoax has been almost as compelling as the story of the mission itself. What if the truth isn't just about rockets and moon dust, but about trust, belief, and the power of a well-told lie? Let's start with the story we think we know. Not the NASA version, but the version told by the doubters, the skeptics. The story of the great lunar deception. This narrative is incredibly seductive because it appeals to our inner detective. It asks us to look closer at the evidence, to not just blindly accept the official story. And when you start looking, the apparent inconsistencies begin to pile up. The first and most famous piece of evidence is the American flag. In the iconic photos and videos from the Apollo 11 landing site, the flag planted by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin appears to be fluttering, waving in a gentle breeze. But wait a minute. There's no air on the moon. No atmosphere means no wind. So how can a flag wave? To a skeptic, the answer is obvious. It's waving in the breeze of an air-conditioned Hollywood studio. The directors just missed a tiny, crucial detail. Then there are the stars. Look at any of the photos taken on the lunar surface. The sky is a perfect pitch-black void. Utterly empty. Where are the stars? From the moon, with no atmosphere to obscure the view, the stars should be brilliant, magnificent, and countless. Their absence is suspicious. Was it impossible to simulate a realistic star field on the backdrop of the set, so they just left it black? The shadows are another key piece of the puzzle. The sun should be the only significant light source on the moon. That means all shadows should be parallel to each other, running in the same direction. But in many Apollo photos, the shadows cast by the astronauts and the lunar module seem to go in different directions. This suggests multiple light sources, like the complex lighting rigs used on a film set. Some photos even show objects in shadow that are somehow still visible, as if illuminated by a fill light. And what about the journey itself? The astronauts had to pass through the Van Allen radiation belts, intense bands of radiation trapped by Earth's magnetic field. The theory goes that the radiation would have been lethal, or at least cause severe illness. The thin aluminum shell of the Apollo spacecraft wouldn't have been enough to protect them. So, the story of them passing through unharmed is scientifically impossible, a clear fabrication. The list goes on. There's a famous photo with a rock in the foreground that appears to have the letter C perfectly inscribed on it, looking for all the world like a prop labeled by a set designer. There are questions about why the blast crater under the lunar lander is missing. Shouldn't a rocket engine kicking up that much dust leave a huge hole? The photos themselves are too perfect. The crosshairs on the camera lens sometimes appear behind objects in the photo, an impossibility if they were etched into the camera. Each of these points, taken together, paints a compelling picture. It's a story of a massive government conspiracy, a lie so big it's almost unbelievable, which, to a believer, is exactly why it worked. It feels like you've uncovered a secret, pulled back the curtain on the greatest magic trick ever performed. It's a narrative that validates a deep-seated suspicion of authority and celebrates the power of the individual to question the official story. This isn't just a conspiracy theory, it's a counter-narrative of monumental scale. So where did this story come from? It's easy to assume it started the moment Armstrong's boot hit the dust, but that's not the case. In 1969, the world was almost universally united in awe. The initial reaction was one of triumph. The hoax theory didn't really gain traction until the mid-1970s, and it owes its existence largely to one man, Bill Kaysing. Kaysing was not a scientist or an engineer. He had a degree in English and had worked as a technical writer for Rocketdyne, one of the companies that helped build the Saturn V rocket engines. He left the company in 1963, a full 6 years before the moon landing. In 1976, he self-published a pamphlet called "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion swindle." In it, he laid out many of the core arguments that form the basis of the hoax theory to this day. Kaysing's claims were born in a very specific cultural moment. The mid-70s in America were a period of profound disillusionment. The Vietnam War had eroded public trust in the government's honesty about its military operations. The Watergate scandal had proven that the highest office in the land was capable of elaborate deception and cover-ups. The Pentagon Papers revealed a long history of government lies. In this atmosphere of deep-seated distrust, the idea that NASA and the U.S. government could lie about something as audacious as the moon landing suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. It fit the mood of the times perfectly. Kaysing's pamphlet, and later a 1978 film called Capricorn, one which depicted a faked Mars landing, planted a seed of doubt that began to grow. The theory offered a simple explanation for a complex achievement and provided a framework for skepticism. It was an idea that took root in the fertile soil of conspiracy culture, and with the rise of the internet, it exploded. Websites, forums, and YouTube videos could now dissect photos and videos endlessly, finding new anomalies and reinforcing the narrative for a global audience. The story of the hoax became a self-sustaining ecosystem of belief. But this is where we pull on the thread, because for every seemingly damning piece of evidence the conspiracy theory presents, there is a clear, logical, and scientifically sound explanation. The story of the hoax falls apart not when you look at it from a distance, but when you zoom in on the details with a bit of physics, a bit of photography, and a bit of common sense. The real story isn't just true. It's far more elegant and impressive than the fiction of the conspiracy. Let's go back to that waving flag. The flag was held up by a pole hammered into the ground, but it also had a horizontal, telescoping rod extending from the top to hold it unfurled. The astronauts had trouble extending this rod all the way, which is why the flag has a permanent ripple in it, making it look like it's caught in a breeze. The fluttering you see in the video is simple physics. In the vacuum of space, once an object is set in motion, it continues to move until another force acts on it. When the astronauts twisted and planted the pole into the lunar soil, they set the flag in motion. Without air resistance to dampen the movement, the ripples continued to travel through the fabric for some time. It wasn't waving in the wind, it was wobbling from being handled. Now for the missing stars. This is one of the easiest to explain, and it comes down to basic photography. The moon's surface, illuminated by the unfiltered, direct light of the sun, is incredibly bright. The astronauts' spacesuits were brilliant white for thermal reasons, making them even brighter. In order to get a clear picture of the astronauts and the lunar landscape, the camera's settings, the aperture and the shutter speed, had to be set for a very bright scene. This meant a fast shutter speed and a small aperture, letting in very little light. The faint, distant light of the stars was simply too dim to be captured in the exposure. It's the exact same reason you can't see stars during the daytime on Earth. The sky is too bright. If you were standing on the moon, you could absolutely see the stars if you let your eyes adjust and blocked out the glare from the ground, but a camera set to photograph a sunlit landscape can't. What about those weird shadows? The idea that they should all be parallel assumes the lunar surface is a perfectly flat, level plane. It's not. The landscape is covered in craters, hills, and undulations. A shadow that falls into a small crater or up the side of a small ridge will be distorted and appear to point in a different direction relative to a shadow on a flat piece of ground next to it. It's a simple matter of perspective. Furthermore, the sun wasn't the only light source. There was a second massive light source in the sky, the Earth, which provides significant Earth shine. More importantly, the lunar surface itself is highly reflective. Sunlight bouncing off the gray dust, the white suits, and the metallic lander acted as a massive fill light, illuminating objects that were in shadow. This is why you can see details on the side of an astronaut even when he's standing in the shadow of the lunar module. It's not a studio light, it's reflected sunlight. The Van Allen belts are a serious hazard, but the claims of their lethality are wildly exaggerated. NASA knew about the belts and spent years studying them. They are not a uniform wall of death. The Apollo missions were specifically plotted on a trajectory that passed through the thinnest parts of the belts, and they did so at very high speed. The total time spent in the most intense regions was minimal, and the total radiation dose the astronauts received was well within safe limits, about the equivalent of a chest X-ray. It was a calculated risk, a feat of engineering and flight planning, not an impossibility. As for the other anomalies, the C on the rock is a classic example of confirmation bias. It doesn't appear on the original NASA photographic negatives, only on latter generation copies and prints. The most likely explanation is that it's a tiny hair or fiber that was caught in the printing process, a common artifact in pre-digital photography. The lack of a blast crater under the lander is also easily explained. The lander's engine throttled down significantly during the final moments of descent. In the vacuum of space, the exhaust plume spreads out widely instead of being a concentrated jet. While it certainly kicked up a lot of surface dust, it didn't have the focused power to carve out a deep crater in the dense, compacted lunar soil beneath the surface dust. Every single point raised by conspiracy theorists has a logical, scientific rebuttal. But debunking these points one by one almost misses the bigger picture. The single greatest flaw in the moon landing hoax theory isn't the evidence for the landing, it's the sheer impossibility of the conspiracy itself. Consider the scale. The Apollo program employed over 400,000 people across the United States. It involved thousands of companies, universities, and government agencies. To fake the landings would have required an unprecedented conspiracy involving tens of thousands of people, from the scientists building the rockets to the technicians managing the tracking stations. Every single one of them would have had to keep the secret perfectly for over 50 years without a single credible deathbed confession, a single leaked document, or a single whistleblower. The Watergate scandal, which involved only a handful of high-level conspirators, unraveled completely. The idea of keeping a secret on this scale is simply not plausible. It would have been, by orders of magnitude, more difficult to fake the moon landing convincingly than it was to actually go. But what if you don't trust NASA? What if you believe all their evidence is part of the lie? Fine, let's ignore NASA entirely. The most compelling evidence that we went to the moon comes from outside the United States. At the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union was America's greatest rival. Their intelligence services were second to none, and their space program was tracking the Apollo missions with every tool they had. They listened to the radio transmissions. They tracked the spacecraft's trajectory. If the United States had tried to fake the landing, if the Saturn V rocket had just flown into orbit and circled the Earth for a week while a TV show was broadcast, the Soviets would have known instantly. They would have possessed the ultimate propaganda victory. They could have exposed their arch-nemesis in a world-shattering lie. The fact that they didn't, the fact that Soviet state media and top officials publicly acknowledged the American triumph, is perhaps the most powerful proof of all. Their silence on any hoax is deafening. But it wasn't just the Soviets. Amateur radio operators and observatories around the world, like the Jodrell Bank Observatory in the UK, independently tracked the radio signals coming from the Apollo spacecraft, confirming they were indeed coming from the moon's vicinity, not from a transmitter in Earth orbit or a studio on the ground. Then there is the physical evidence. Over the course of 6 missions, the Apollo astronauts brought back 382 kilograms, that's 842 pounds, of lunar rocks. These aren't just any rocks. They have been studied by thousands of independent scientists in dozens of countries for half a century. They are geologically unique. They contain no water, a trait of rocks formed in a vacuum. They show signs of being bombarded by micrometeorites in a way that is impossible on Earth, where our atmosphere burns them up. They have a chemical and isotopic composition completely different from terrestrial or known meteorite samples. No one has ever been able to prove that a single one of these rocks is a fake. And if that's not enough, there is evidence on the moon that we can still interact with today. The astronauts on Apollo 11, 14, and 15 left behind special arrays of mirrors called retroreflectors. For more than 50 years, observatories on Earth, from Texas to France, have been able to aim powerful lasers at these specific locations on the moon and measure the time it takes for the light to bounce back. This project, known as the Lunar Laser Ranging Experiment, allows scientists to measure the distance to the moon with millimeter precision. It's an ongoing experiment. You can't bounce a laser off a memory. You need a physical object. The reflectors are there. They work. They are irrefutable proof of a human presence on the moon. Finally, in the modern era, we no longer have to rely on 1960s photography. Since 2009, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO, has been circling the moon, mapping its surface in incredible high resolution. The LRO has taken clear, sharp pictures of all the Apollo landing sites. In these images, you can see the descent stages of the lunar modules, the scientific equipment left behind, the rovers, and even the faint, ghostly tracks left by the astronauts' boots in the undisturbed lunar dust 50 years ago. The footprints are still there. So we are left with two stories. One is a tale of a vast, impossibly perfect conspiracy, a 50-year secret kept by 500,000 people, a lie so flawless it even fooled the enemy who had every reason to expose it. A story that requires us to believe that thousands of scientists around the world have been duped by fake rocks and that laser beams are bouncing off of imaginary mirrors. The other story is a little more incredible. It's a story about a species that, for a brief, shining moment, looked up at a point of light in the night sky and said, "Let's go there." It's a story of immense political will, of breathtaking scientific achievement, and of the courage of a few individuals who strapped themselves to the most powerful machine ever built and flew into the great unknown. It's a story proven by rival nations, by physical artifacts, and by ongoing experiments. The half-truth of the moon landing hoax isn't about the evidence. It's about what the story says about us. It's a symptom of a world where it can feel easier to believe in a grand deception than in a grand achievement. It reflects a breakdown in trust between people and the institutions that are supposed to serve them. But in debunking this particular myth, we are reminded of a powerful lesson. Critical thinking doesn't just mean questioning the official story. It also means critically examining the alternatives. And in this case, the conspiracy requires a far greater leap of faith than the truth. The real legacy of Apollo isn't just a flag and footprints. It is the overwhelming, verifiable, and multinational body of evidence that proves one of the most unbelievable stories in human history just happens to be true. Now you know the real story. What other half-truths are still out there? If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us next time. Until then, stay curious.